So welcome to my class, and in this I'm going to talk about Phillips curve diagram. Now, Phillips curve. So something for you to find out who gave this. I'll tell you that I'll just tell you what it is. So you have the OX and OY axis. On the OY axis we have inflation, and on the OX axis is unemployment. Okay, so the horizontal axis represents the unemployment rate ranging from low to high level, say like 1, 2%, okay, 3, 4%, 5%, 6%, and so on goes. And inflation again is a vertical axis ranging from low to high level, again say 1%, 2%, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the curve is something like this. Okay, so the Phillips curve is typically shown as a downward sloping curve indicating an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. Is that clear? As the unemployment rate decreases, so if you're coming backwards, as the unemployment rate decreases, what happens? Inflation tends to increase. And if the unemployment rate increases, if it is increasing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then what happens is, that is moving right on the curve, the inflation rate tends to decrease. So that is the inverse relation. So for example, in an economy with low unemployment, if there's low unemployment, which means near full employment, workers have more bargaining power, leading to wage increases and higher demand for goods and services. This increased demand can push prices up, leading to inflation. So let me explain again with an example. Suppose in an economy there's low unemployment. Low unemployment means almost near full employment. So what happens? Workers have more bargaining power, for one, right? Then if they have more bargaining power, means that they can influence wages, higher wages. They can get an increase in wage. So this leads to wage increase, and that leads to higher demand, DD, for goods and services. And now, when this happens, this increased demand, with this increased demand, what happens? The demand can push prices up. So this will push prices up. And if the prices are pushed up, this leading to inflation. Is that right? Okay. Now, on the other hand, during periods of high unemployment, if there is high, this is one, and second is another condition, another scenario, another example. During periods of high unemployment, if there is high unemployment, what happens? There is less pressure on wages. Okay. As it is, you'll work for any wage that you get. And prices won't be pushed up. So the demand is just there. It's not influenced much. So this results in lower inflation rates. Is that right? So once again, what does a Phillips curve show you? Okay, let me just use this red pencil once again. So when we are talking about Phillips curve, what are we talking about? We are talking about an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. That is a Phillips curve. It shows a downward sloping curve which indicates an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. And on the horizontal, so we have the OX and OY axis. On the OX axis, that is the horizontal axis, we take the unemployment rate ranging from low 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, etc., ranging from low to high levels, and the vertical axis represents the inflation rate ranging from low to high levels. Okay, 1%, 2%, 3%. So explaining that, as the unemployment rate decreases, that is moving left on the curve, the inflation rate tends to rise. So as we move up the curve, and when you're conversely, as unemployment rate increases, when the unemployment rate increases, that is moving right on the curve, that is downward shift, we go downward, the inflation rate tends to decline. Okay, inflation rate tends to decline. And again, just to explain that, suppose if there is, in an economy with low unemployment, if there's low unemployment, okay, if suppose there is low unemployment, that is near full employment, workers have more bargaining power. So that will lead to increase in wage, that is higher demand for goods and services. This increased demand pushes prices up, leading to inflation. Okay, on the other hand, during periods of high unemployment, if there is high unemployment, too much unemployment, then what happens? There is less pressure on wages. Suppose it's 5% less pressure on wages, and what happens is what? So there'll be lower prices. And when there are lower prices, what happens? I mean, there's too much of unemployment, then what happens? Lower bargaining power, lower bargaining power, lower wages, lower prices, less demand, and leading to less inflation rate. Is that clear? So that's it. So the Phillips curve, as you see, what does it suggest? So in a way, what does it suggest? A trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the short run. And policymakers historically used this trade-off to make decisions regarding monetary and fiscal policy accordingly. Okay. But then, of course, there are a lot of limitations. If you see, the Phillips curve is based on historical data, may not hold true in all economic conditions, factors such as expectations. Okay. Then supply shocks or structural changes can impact the trade-off between inflation and unemployment. The long-run Phillips curve challenges the notion of a permanent trade-off, as efforts to reduce unemployment may lead to higher inflation without sustained benefits. So it's not as simple as it seems, but just to understand at our level, this much is enough. If you you've understood this is good enough, especially when you're doing Keynesian economics and all, and when you're doing aggregate demand inflation, when you're talking about, it's very important to know what's this Phillips curve. So, it is a useful tool for understanding economic dynamics, and also they guide the government. These are models to guide decisions on monetary policy, fiscal policy, and addressing economic challenges. So, this diagram, what does it illustrate? It illustrates the inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment rates. And based on this understanding, economists and policymakers craft more effective strategies for economic stability and growth. I hope you've understood the basic what is Phillips curve, right? So he was an economist, A.W. Phillips. So he introduced this curve, talked about it in the 1950s. And he was the one who showed the inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment rates. Then that's it. Uh, Basically, it is what we are doing is a simplistic view of the Phillips curve. And really, if you read, if you have to really know about it, there's so much about expectations and supply shocks and structural changes that impact this trade-offs between inflation and unemployment, as you see. Okay, so for now, this much is enough for you to know that Phillips curve offers insight into complex relationship between inflation and unemployment. And if you know about it, it'll help it helps economists and policymakers to craft more effective strategies for economic stability. Is that clear? Okay, so for homework, what is Phillips curve? You must know something about the economist who gave it and why did he give it, in what circumstances. Draw the diagram and explain the diagram. Make a diagram, explain it. And what is really important, if you really want to know a little bit more and for you to understand better, you should write a little about what are the limitations. Basically, I want you to delve on factors such as expectations and supply shocks and structural changes which can impact the trade off between the inflation and unemployment. Okay, so we'll get back in the next class.